My guest in the studio doesn't need a lot of introduction to people here in Winnipeg or around the world, but I wanted to give him an introduction anyway to honor him nonetheless. So, Maestro Tovey, he's a Grammy and Juno award-winning conductor and composer. He's led most of the major and greatest orchestras around the world. Currently, he's principal conductor at the BBC Concert Orchestra, returning to his homeland there of England after having spent the last 18 years in Vancouver with the VSO, leading them to new heights. He's now back in Winnipeg, and he was music director with the WSO from 1989 to 2000, and he's also was a co-founder of the New Music Festival, and he's back in town to conduct there. We were ready to jump in.
Oh, I was just going to say, and he's back here at minus 60 or whatever it is.
Yeah, welcome back, right?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, memories of Winnipeg, right?
You know, you do forget how cold it gets. I must say, I've been a bit wimpy during the last couple of days, but, you know, once you get used to it, I mean, it's cold, people, just get on with it.
Yeah.
And actually, it's just such a great city, and it looks so amazing in the sun. I mean, there's not a cloud in the sky. Mm-hmm. It's really quite
not quite
stunning.
like Vancouver.
Not quite like Vancouver, but, you know, Vancouver can be grey for days on end, and it can pour with rain. I mean, of course, it's wonderful because the garden can bloom
in February.
Basically, the buds are coming through now. So,
yeah.
But I'm delighted, always delighted to come back.
Well, before we talk about, everybody knows why you're here. Before we talk about the concert coming up, why don't you tell us a bit about now? You spent 18 years in Vancouver. The last 18 years in Vancouver. You've been back home in England now for almost a year or so.
Well,
officially?
I fly back for concerts with the BBC Concert Orchestra, and it's good to see the family. I have a son who lives in England, 2 sisters, and I love going to England. I conduct there still quite a bit. And the BBC Concert Orchestra is a fantastic orchestra, so I've been enjoying that. I've been principal conductor there for just over a year, and I'm also artistic advisor of the Rhode Island Philharmonic in Providence, which is a beautiful city, one of my favorite cities in America, actually, and Rhode Island is just a gem of a state. And I've also been a professor at Boston University, although that's coming to an end. I haven't quite got enough time to do everything. And then just a couple of weeks ago, I started as artistic director of Calgary Opera. So I'm enjoying that enormously. So it's a very varied life, and it's with 3 major organizations now as opposed to just the one that I've been used to in the last 30 years. But I think with the number of performances that happen in Calgary and Rhode Island, it makes it possible for me to drop in and be involved. And they all have fantastic management, so I'm very fortunate, and I still get to conduct in New York and LA and other places. So that's always exciting. I was in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, which was actually warmer than Winnipeg, but it's still quite amazing.
Still windy but warmer.
Very, very windy. Yes.
So how was the transition moving from? I mean, you were in Vancouver for 18 years. Was it tough to leave that?
It was tough. It was tough to leave Winnipeg, and it was tough to leave Vancouver, largely because I think that your best work comes towards the end of your tenure in a funny kind of way. In Vancouver, I announced in 2013 that I wouldn't sign another contract, but I still had 4.5 years to go. And whilst that brought certain pressures, it did mean that I could relax and enjoy the last. There was no speculation about will he, won't he stay on. I already decided that when our youngest daughter left home, that would be when I would depart. I had a great relationship with the musicians in Vancouver, and it was a wonderful time. The orchestra built a state-of-the-art music school right next door to the Orpheum Theatre where we play, and the musicians are able to teach there. It's practice studios for people who visit. People like Yo-Yo Ma, Isaac Pullman, Renee Fleming have all given masterclasses there, and it's become quite an incredible facility. The great thing about Vancouver was that we were in a theatre called the Orpheum Theatre, 1925 vaudeville house, which actually had freakishly perfect acoustics for an orchestra. Here, of course, in Winnipeg, there's a slight disaster with the Centennial Concert Hall because they've tried to do a makeshift fix-it instead of having a proper acoustical shell, and that's going to have to be revisited because here in Winnipeg there's a world-class orchestra, and they deserve to have a world-class hall, and it's a shame that the concert hall, frankly, backstage, on stage, has been allowed to have third-rate facilities, I think, on stage. That's a shame, and that needs to be fixed. But otherwise, I think Winnipeg has this fantastic orchestra, which I loved being here for 12 years. It's just so great to be back.
What are your challenges right now with the BBC Concert Orchestra, and what are the exciting things you've got coming up with them?
I don't really have challenges. The great thing about being a principal conductor of a broadcasting orchestra, excuse me, is that you there's no marketing, there's no publicity, there's no fundraising, because it's a broadcasting corporation of the state. And also, if they want to advertise something, they just stick it on the radio or they talk about it. The Radio Times is built in. About half our concerts are actually free too, so people apply to a lottery to come and listen to concerts. And we do a lot of studio recordings for the radio. We're making commercial recordings as well. The most visible part of what we do will be the promenade concerts at the Royal Albert Hall in the summer, and I do my first one of those this year in August with the BBC Concert Orchestra. And we do a lot of touring, so the orchestra has come back from 3 weeks in China. I didn't go because it was already fixed up before I took on the mantle, but we have tours planned in the future. So it's a wonderful job. Top players in London are in the BBC Concert Orchestra, and it's just thrilling. We're taking on a new facility at Alexandra Palace, which is, for those who know London, in the north of London, Muswell Hill. On the top of the hill, it's an old BBC recording facility, and it's just a great position. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
It's a dry cold.
Yes, I know. Yeah. So how, I guess, with all the orchestras that you're conducting with, and over the next couple of years, and all the plans you did have, can you even is it even possible to call England your home now, or is it?
England's not my home. Actually, Canada's my home, and despite this funny accent, two of my kids are Canadian. One is English. In fact, one of my daughters was born just across the river here in St Boniface in 1998. The other one was born in Vancouver. My son was born 1 year. He was 1 year old when the first New Music Festival happened. So he lived in Canada for quite a long time. So Canada is still home. At the moment, Vancouver is still base of operations, but that'll be changing soon. And I'll probably have a place in England, but actually, one's heart is always, I think, in Canada.
Well, let's go. I just want to remind people I'm in conversation with Maestro Bramwell Tovey. He is currently the conductor of the BBC Concert Orchestra, principal conductor. And of course, he spent a number of years here in Winnipeg and Vancouver as well. So take us back a little bit to the beginning of the New Music Festival. Tell us a bit about how that all came around.
Well, it was interesting. The first winter I was here, which would have been, or the first January I was here, would have been 1990. I hadn't quite realized how things really did close up in terms of the outdoors, and how you had to be very, very careful. I remember running out of gasoline on a highway, and I just was in my sports coat, and I had suede brogues on. Or what was I thinking? Stylishly, what was I thinking?
You look great, but you're freezing.
And I had to run home, and it was minus 29 that night. And I just remember thinking I'd really miscalculated what kind of a climate it was. And then we were struggling for audiences in January. It was proving difficult. It proves difficult everywhere in the world, because after Christmas and all the holidays and so on,
New Year's,
they've got no money left apart from anything else. So we looked. Max Tapper was then the executive director, the dear departed late Max Tapper, and Barry McCartan was our director of marketing and public relations at that time, or our director of public relations at that time. John Melnick was our director of marketing, and I just remember we all sat down and we brainstormed about what we thought could happen. And I had this idea of new music, and I promulgated it, but the board a little bit reluctant at first. I wanted to start in 1991, but they felt that we needed to do more preparation and we needed to raise some significant sponsorship, which we did. In those days, tobacco was a legitimate public sponsorship, and we went to the De Maurier Arts Council, and Imperial Tobacco sponsored the New Music Festival. That turned out eventually to be quite controversial because, of course, everything changes, and but in those days it was as legitimate as maybe smoking marijuana is now. Not for me, but for whoever wants to participate. But we were very lucky to have that sponsorship for the first 5 years. It was very lucrative, and it was extremely good from a press and marketing point. And we were able to bring guest artists in. We didn't have a major composer that first year, but we did play the John Adams work Harmony Lyra, which we're playing at the concert this Saturday, and it was a great success. I remember when people were coming into the Sunday night concert, in those days we had bleachers around three sides of the stage, and those bleachers held about 750, 800 people. I'm told now they can't have them anymore because of health and safety or some spurious reason.
It gets pretty wild up on the stage.
Well, it does. Yeah, it does. Winnipeggers are like, and it was a tremendous atmosphere. You were so close to the performers, you could almost touch them. The second year we invited John Coriolano, and he was a tremendous hit with the orchestra and with the audiences. His music was so communicative. And we have to remember that at that particular time in 1992, the fashion in contemporary music was just changing from what we might call the avant-garde, that is to say music that actually was written more to a mathematical concept and was designed to be formulaic in terms of technique, to back to music which was, I know it sounds crazy when you describe it now, doesn't it? Back to music which actually was meant to describe the inner narrative of human beings. I know it sounds bizarre, but that's actually how things changed. After the war, there had been such exploitation of new music that composers felt they wanted to be more formulaic, so it couldn't be exploited, and it became, and of course it's very legitimate as a field of endeavor if you like that sort of thing. Personally, I've always found new music more successful when it deals with the human narrative, and in 1992 that's what we set out to do. Glenn Buer was our composer in residence, and Glenn came up with a master plan which was absolutely brilliant, which involved having the orchestra at the beginning of the week, having concerts from the orchestra having the orchestra split in half so that we could have two concerts in the week, and then finishing with an orchestra concert. We punctuated the week with chamber music concerts. We got CBC involved. People might remember CBC as being something that used to support serious music. Nowadays, the only serious music channel that we're able to get in Vancouver is, thankfully, Classic 107 FM, which we listen to in Vancouver because it's just so good. But in those days, CBC was a force to be reckoned with, and rather than the spent force it is now. And we really enjoyed close relationships with David Yeager, who was the executive producer of 2 New Hours. And every concert was broadcast for the first 10 years or so of the festival. And they were a tremendous partner, CBC. So gradually it took off, and there was something of the pioneering spirit about it. And there was a critic in Ottawa called Jacob Siskind, the late Jacob Siskind, who wrote that the only reason that we're having a new music festival in Winnipeg in January is because we have to huddle together here to keep warm. So we thought we'd use this as a reverse piece of propaganda, and we put a petition together, and he said if they're coming for the music, I'd eat my hat, or something like that. So we put together a petition that I invited him to eat his hat, and I must say he published it as a great sport, and it brought us even more sort of national notoriety, and gradually it took off. The audiences were incredible. It was like going to a hockey game. They would cheer, they would stamp. I remember once we performed Aaron J. Kernis's Symphony No. 2, which was about the impact and the conflict of the first Iraqi war, which had taken place a year or two previously. And this is not a particularly pacifist piece at all. It was just a piece that dealt with human issues like post-traumatic stress syndrome and that sort of thing. And it was a very, very moving piece that had a very, very dramatic ending. And I remember describing it to the audience and telling the audience that the orchestra have to put their hands over their ears because it's so loud at the end, and they must understand why. And when we played the piece, the audience went crazy, and we realized that actually we were onto something here, because here was music that was dealing with a very considerable international event that really had affected people in our city. And more music came in. People like Kelly Murray Murphy came with a beautiful string quartet, complete opposite, absolutely introvert. This is my voice. And I just remember the whole room of 1,000+ people being transfixed by this beautiful string quartet that had won the CBC prize. She's gone on to have one of the best careers in orchestral composition in the country. So gradually we were meeting all kinds of people. Glenn was introducing us to a lot of composers, and the orchestra were becoming very versatile at doing all this stuff. So from the early days, it was really quite an amazing event, and made possible by two sets of people. Firstly, the public who just came to it in droves, and I believe still do, and who stamped and hollered and voiced their opinion. If they didn't like something, you'd hear something about that too.
And it wouldn't continue, probably.
It was great. And then, of course, the real heroes of the event were the musicians of the WSO, because they're fabulous musicians, and it's still really a fabulous orchestra. And we asked yesterday who played in the first performance of the New Music Festival, and it was less than 10. Afterwards at dinner we tried to count it up. It was about 7 that I think that we played in the first performance.
Wow.
So 28 years. I just can't believe that it's gone on so long. It's wonderful.
I'm in conversation with Maestro Bramwell Tovey. He's conducting tomorrow night. He's going to be kicking off the New Music Festival with the piece that kicked off the New Music Festival 28 years ago. John Adams.
By John Adams.
Yeah.
I don't even look old enough for that, do I?
I don't think so.
No,
you
thank
look,
you.
Yeah, younger now than you
I look
ever-
better on the radio.
So do I. Tell us quickly about this John Adams work that you're going to be doing tomorrow night.
Harmony Lyra is a huge symphony of a piece which has some wacky titles, which I won't share right now, but was really one of the first major symphonic works of symphonic length. It's about 40 minutes, which was accessible, tuneful, rhythmic, but full of new material, minimalist, driving rhythms, beautiful soaring melodies, and gorgeous colors, and just I think describes what it was like to be alive in the naughty 90s, as they're now called. It was just an incredible force to be reckoned with back in 1990. Now it feels easier to play than it did 28 years ago. There's a nice backstory to this, because after I went to Vancouver in 2000, there was a big picture of me outside the Orpheum, and John Adams was actually conducting the VSO in a concert of one of his pieces that the orchestra had been involved in commissioning, Naive and Sentimental Music. And he saw my picture outside, and I'd never met him. I didn't think he even knew who I was. And he said to the management, is he here in town yet? And they said, well, yes, he is just here. We'll get in touch with him if you want to meet him. He said, yeah. He said, I'd really like to meet him. So they rang up and said, John Adams wants to meet you. Well, that was like being told Mozart wants to have lunch with you. So I went to meet him, and we had lunch together. He insisted on paying, and when I asked him how did he know who I was, he said Jenny Bilfeld, who was his director at Boosey and Hawkes, the music publishers, had been to the first music festival, great friend of the festival over many years, and she had taken a cassette tape of the performance of Harmony Lyra and given it to John Adams. At that stage, we were only the third orchestra in the world that had tackled the piece, and he said, I loved the performance. The orchestra sounded fantastic, and I just wanted to say thank you. And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, that is amazing. And every time I've seen John Adams in the intervening years, I've seen him quite a few times, the first thing out of his mouth always is, I'll never forget that performance of Harmony Lyra. And it was just a tremendous sense of pride in the orchestra, the city, and what's been achieved at the New Music Festival. It really is, at this point in its history, it's one of the leading new music events in the world. It's so incredible.
Have you actually performed this work between then and now?
No.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
I've done a lot of John Adams' pieces, including his Dr. Atomic Symphony, and of course, Short Ride in a Fast Machine has played a lot. I've done lots of his music, but actually this particular piece I haven't performed again because the forces are so great, it's so big, that it's hard to put together sometimes. But it's just the force of the piece is so compelling and so extraordinary that it has a vitality all of its own. I think we've never been able to get to, or the orchestra has never been able to get John Adams up to Winnipeg, I believe. I don't think he's been here.
I don't think so, no.
But we should persevere, because he's. I think he'd love to come. He knows all about it.
That's exciting, right? You're kind of bringing it full circle. So.
Well, it is full circle, but of course it's not even halfway through its life yet. Probably, I hope so. Anyway, it's so great that it's still going with such force, and the fact that Maestro Tovey, who I met for the first time yesterday, what a wonderful man he is. Really enjoyed meeting him. Has now taken on the mantle here and taken on the challenge of the New Music Festival wholeheartedly, and I think that's quite wonderful.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you back in town and back in our studios. Thanks for tuning us in wherever you are in Vancouver. You can stream us in London too, you know.
I think I might have done so. It's a pleasure. I always enjoy listening to the station because it's just it's just delivered so beautifully and softly, and you don't have people hectoring you like you do on CBC now. It's just radio at its best. I think I enjoy it thoroughly.
Thank you very much for
Thank
that
you.
compliment.
It's not a compliment, it's just the truth.
All right. So Winnipeg New Music Festival gets underway indoors tomorrow night. You can catch out the outdoor concert tonight. Dress warm for it on the Assiniboine River. Maestro Bramwell Tovey is conducting John Adams. He's also going to be doing music of Harry Staphylakis, Kelly Marie Murphy as well, and one of the features, Yuri Hooker, WSO principal cellist. So
Looking forward to that. Playing the music of Jocelyn Morlock, who's the composer
Jocelyn
in
Morlock
residence
as
in
well.
Vancouver Symphony. Yep.
Correct, that's right.
She's from Brandon.
Yes.
Nobody's perfect.
You said that. All right. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you
in
very
this
much.
morning. Again, you can go to WNMF.ca for more information about all the concerts to start tomorrow night and for tickets as well.